About 5 minutes later, he calls back, and this time he is screaming into the phone. He's obviously frightened. Got all the guards out with their weapons drawn. He said, when I finally calmed him down, he said, we're looking at a reddish orange, very bright light, and it's hovering just above the front gate. Scared to death. They were all frightened because obviously it was not a helicopter. There was no engine noise. It was just sitting there and wanted me to tell him what to do next. Now, this time I took it very seriously because it was obviously, it felt like we were under some sort of an attack, or it felt like some imminent attack was going to happen. And I said, secure the facility, make sure it's secure, do whatever you have to. And then he hung up. One of the guards got injured. It wasn't from the object itself. It was a response, I think, to what they were looking at. He somehow injured his hand. He got a cut in his hand. But anyway, he hung up the phone. I went to wake up my commander and tell him about those phone calls. And before I could say anything, we got horns and bells and whistles going on down there.
Yeah.
And we knew what that meant. It meant there was something going on with the missiles themselves.
Let's go!
Mr. Salas, welcome to the show. I appreciate you being on here with us. Honestly, have wanted to talk to you for a long time. I learned about what happened at Malmstrom in 1967 when I was stationed there. I think it's kind of funny how much the UFO thing and the UAP thing has kind of taken over Great Falls as well. The minor league baseball team is Orbit is the mascot. You know, it's just interesting. Which is an alien. But it's pretty incredible to be able to finally talk to you and just kind of hear what happened from you specifically. Again, thank you so much for joining us. I know that I want to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself as well, and then we can just jump right in.
Sure. You want me to adjust the lighting? There seems to be a bright light over my head here.
Sure. If you'd like to adjust, you go right ahead.
I thought that was on purpose. I thought that was for the ambiance.
Right. Being abducted.
Yeah.
That's a little better.
Definitely.
Okay, well, I'm happy to hear that the word's gotten out to Great Falls, Montana about this. Of course, I couldn't talk about it for a long time, and I don't know. What would you like to know about my background?
I actually was wondering why it is you joined the Air Force, because I've had quite a many conversation with missileers, and most of them will tell you that missileer wasn't their first choice. I know you were out in near Roy, Montana at the time it happened, siloed, I believe. But it's kind of interesting. Did you choose to work in the with ICBMs, or is that something that you got that was chosen for you?
Yeah, I went to the Air Force Academy, and my first assignment after I started pilot training, but I didn't finish, and it's a long story. But from there, I went to Tyndall Air Force Base and was trained as what they called a weapons controller. We did training missions with fighter interceptors, and then one day I got a call from personnel saying that they needed people in the missile field, and would I be interested? So, yeah, I took the assignment. I went through training, wound up at Malmstrom around August of '66.
Okay.
And that's how I got in there.
Did you know that you were going to get stationed stateside, or was that one of those assignments that had a possibility of? Because this is that early '60s, right? So we're thinking Cuban Missile Crisis and kind of Cold Wars, or we're going through that section, right? So I was
Well,
just
also
wondering if you knew
Vietnam.
you were going to get in Vietnam. So I was just wondering,
Yeah.
did you know that you were going to get stuck in the middle of the United States, or was that a surprise to you?
No, I didn't know where I was going to be assigned. They just needed people in the missile field, and so that's where they assigned me.
Yeah. Did Malmstrom have aircraft in the late 60s? Because it doesn't anymore.
Oh yeah, sure. We had a fighter interceptor squadron.
Hmm.
I forget what kind of fighters they had. I think they had 106s at the time.
Okay.
Uh, but yeah, and we had a helicopter squadron also.
Yeah. Helo Squadron still there, supporting the missile field still, and
Yeah.
the security forces guys, which I believe were called security police, back when you were there in the 60s. But yeah, honestly, was just wondering if you could take us through, as you have so many other times with other people, what happened leading up to this. And I was wondering too if this was your first ever experience with UAP, or if perhaps you'd had an experience growing up.
No, this was my first experience. So we would go on alert status about every 3 days. And on this particular evening, March 24th, 1967, we were on duty at Oscar Flight, which is near
Mm-hmm.
Roy, Montana. Um, and I was the in command of the facility because my commander had, I was a deputy commander at the time. My commander was taking a rest break. As you
Mm-hmm.
know, we had 24-hour duties, so we took turns taking a little nap down
Right.
there. Uh, we were underground, of course, 60 feet underground, locked in, could not open those doors except for certain things.
Mm-hmm.
So sometime in the evening, I get a call from the topside guard or flight security controller,
Oh wow.
as they were called.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, "Sir, we've been seeing some strange lights flying over the facility. They flying very fast, no engine noise, stopping on a dime, reversing course, and making 90-degree turns." Uh, he said, "Sir, they're not aircraft."
Right.
Now, uh, Great Falls Tribune had been publishing stories for weeks prior to that. Uh, uh, Farmers, people, just ordinary people seeing lights, strange lights in the sky, and couldn't explain them. And so there were some reports in the papers about UFOs. So I just jokingly said, "You mean like a UFO?"
Right.
And he said, "Well, sir, I can't explain it. They're not aircraft
Mm-hmm.
because our aircraft can't do that, what they were doing." So this is very similar to the story you've heard from other Navy pilots that have encountered these things.
It is.
Uh, I just kind of thanked him, said, "Okay, let me know if something interesting happens." Yeah.
As if this isn't interesting enough. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll get back to you.
Right.
Well, it was just observation at that point.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know if he was trying to pull my leg. I didn't think so because,
Mm-hmm.
all our communications are professional, usually professional when we're dealing
Right.
with the guards. So uh, I didn't think he was pulling my leg, but, I didn't know what else to say and kind of hung up the phone on him. And about 5 minutes later, he calls back, and this time he is screaming into the phone. He's obviously frightened.
Mm-hmm.
Um, got all the guards out with their weapons drawn. He said, when I finally calmed him down, he said, "We're looking at a reddish orange, very bright light, um, and it's hovering just above the front gate."
Mm-hmm.
And scared to death. They were all frightened. because obviously it was not a helicopter. There was no engine noise. He was just sitting there and wanted me to tell him what to do next. Now, this time I took it very seriously because it was obviously, it felt like we were under some sort of an attack, or it felt like some imminent attack was going to happen. And I said, secure the facility, make sure it's secure, do whatever you have to. And then he hung up. One of the guards got injured. It wasn't from the object itself. It was
Okay.
It was a response, I think, to what they were looking at. He somehow injured his hand. He got a cut in his hand. But anyway, he hung up the phone. I went to wake up my commander and tell him about those phone calls. And before I could say anything, we got horns and bells and whistles going on down there.
Yeah.
And we knew what that meant. It meant there was something going on with the missiles themselves.
Mm-hmm.
We looked over at our status board, and sure enough, the missiles were going from green to red, or no-go.
Mm-hmm.
We had a way of querying the system, and every message we got back on each missile was guidance and control system failure. So we lost all 10 within seconds to guidance and control system failure. They all had the same message. Well, we went through our procedures, and you may or may not know, we rarely had any missile at all go down for any reason.
Mm-hmm.
So this was very odd. We also had a couple of incursion lights, meaning a possible incursion in the launch facilities where the missiles are located. So I had to call up and send guards out there and talk to the FSC again. I said, what's the status of this bright light? And he said it just flew off. So it was there when the missiles went down. My commander called command post back at Malmstrom, reported our incident. And then after that call, he turns to me and says the same thing happened at another flight. I thought he meant the same thing happened at another flight that evening, but it turns out it had happened 8 days earlier. Same, almost identical incident. So within the span of 8 days, we lost 20 of our missiles to UFOs.
I just, first thoughts obviously is how something like that doesn't make it to you and some sort of pass on that this happened 8 days prior. Did you ever get an explanation?
No, that was one of the weird things. As you probably know, we had briefings before we came out into the field. Every day we came out, we had a briefing, and they would talk about any issues in the field or maintenance that was going on that would affect the missiles. And we never heard another word about either the previous incident, which was called the Echo Flight incident, or our own. So after we were relieved that morning, we were ordered back to the base. It flew us back in a helicopter, ordered to report to the squadron commander. And first thing I said to the squadron commander was this some kind of an Air Force exercise? He said, absolutely not. He was white as a sheet. He couldn't explain what had happened. There was a guy there from AFOSI, and all he did was shove a piece of paper at us and said, "Sign here." And this was a non-disclosure agreement. We were never to speak to anyone about this ever.
That's why you didn't get your pass
Ubiquitous
on.
NDA.
Right.
Yeah.
Every time.
And I read a little bit of that NDA. I didn't get a copy. I asked for a copy. They wouldn't give me one. But part of it said you'll spend a lot of time in Leavenworth prison. They
Yeah.
identified the prison for me.
Right. Specifically.
Leavenworth, long time if you ever talk about it. So there I was. We were excused, left his office, and I'm sure my commander didn't speak about it. In fact, the next day, I got a call from these guards that had seen the object, and they wanted me to come out and talk to them about it. You know, they didn't know how to explain it either to themselves, or what was this thing and what's going on?
Yeah.
I had to turn them down, which killed me because they were begging me to come talk to them, and I couldn't. So just to finish the story, about 1994, so it'd been about 27 years later, I was in a bookstore in Seattle, Washington. Saw a book called Above Top Secret by Timothy Good. Picked the book up and went through a few pages and then wound up on page 301 of that book. And on that page, it was written about missiles going down during a UFO incident at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana in 66, 67.
Oh, wow.
And I was kind of excited because I thought, hey, the Air Force must have declassified this thing.
Right.
And I should be able to talk about it. So
Right.
first thing I did is I went home, told my wife about it. She hadn't heard about it.
Oh, wow.
In all that time.
Really followed your NDA.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I jumped to the conclusion that it had been declassified. So what happened was I got a hold of somebody from MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, asked for assistance, somebody to help me submit FOIA requests to the Air Force about what was written in this book. Because I think they did mention Echo Flight. I hadn't, at that time, 27 years later, I didn't remember what flight I was at.
Yeah.
I thought this was my incident the way it was described. So, and I had forgotten my commander had told me the same thing happened in another flight.
Okay.
So, anyway, the Air Force wrote back and said, this is classified, but we're going to declassify it because it's been so long. We're going to declassify it and send you some documents.
Oh, wow.
So they did. They declassified the Echo Flight shutdown, which happened March 16th, 1967. 8 days prior to mine. I didn't realize, or I didn't remember, I didn't know when my incident was until a year or so later. So the next thing I did was try to contact people I knew at Malmstrom and try to remember who my commander was in the capsule at the time of the incident. Because I'd forgotten it.
Sure. Been a while.
Well, you guys, if you know some classified information and you're no longer using it, the best thing to do is try to forget it.
Right.
Pretty
easy to.
What's that?
It can be easy to, especially when you're having to put new information in there. You just kind of brain
Yeah.
dump the old stuff. Yeah.
I mean, I've always tried to tell people that the 95% of the classified information that you ever come across is the most mundane, boring.
It is.
You're
Weather
like,
reports.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, for real.
That's true. But, in this case, it wasn't so mundane. And
Well,
Definitely not. No, not quite a weather report.
anyway, so as soon as we got documents back from the Air Force marked declassified, I started talking about this as a UFO event. When I requested under FOIA, I said nothing about UFOs. So they didn't realize that, or whoever responded didn't realize this. And I started speaking about it as though it was my incident. It wasn't until about 2 years later, in 1996, when I finally got a hold of my commander in the field on that evening, Colonel Fred Mywald. I finally contacted him. He said we were not at Echo Flight, we were at Oscar Flight. So there I was. I had to make a decision, but I had already gone public. I'd given interviews to newspapers and
Right.
went on a radio show, a couple of radio shows, a TV show. And I'd already spoken about this as much detail as I could remember at the time. And so I decided, what the hey, I'm going to keep talking about this because it was so similar to the Echo flight. If Air Force saw fit to declassify the Echo, I thought, well, I might as well keep speaking. So that's what I've been doing.
Yeah.
To this day, I'm still under that NDA.
That's interesting.
That's
It makes
yeah,
me
wow.
it makes me wonder what sort of briefing the security policemen got afterwards, because
I was thinking that
did
too.
those did those guys trip back with you that day, or was their rotation still had them out at the alert facility, or do you recall?
Well, I recall two things. One, when I went back upstairs after we were relieved that next morning, the FSC was very reluctant to talk to me. And I think it was because he had already been ordered not to speak to me about it.
Yeah.
And then the next day, like I said, I was awakened by a call from a group of them wanting me to come out to their barracks or somewhere and chat about this incident, and I had to turn them down. So,
That was
but
probably pretty hard.
I know some of them got reassigned. Some got reassigned to another base, which is what the Air Force will do on these kinds of things. They disperse witnesses
Right.
so that there won't be that, group of people that know something, talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
You do the same SOP with POWs, right? Or detainees
Yeah.
or anybody. You immediately segregate everybody that has corroborating information, and then you safeguard them and keep them apart, right?
Right.
So yeah, it
Exactly.
just makes sense that they would do that with you guys.
Yeah. Now, I'd like to, for people listening, sort of contextualize some of the stuff that you were talking about. Malmstrom Air Force Base and two other bases have what we call large missile fields, and there are ICBMs in the ground, and they're broken up into different sectors, and specific flights are given security and missileer detail over those sectors, and that's what you're talking about. I think a flight is equivalent to a company in the Army, right, Chris? I'm pretty sure. So it's just
how many airmen?
a missile field
I
flight
always
could have.
I always get you guys mixed up.
A missile field flight of security forces airmen could have about 60 at least.
That's either that would be like either a strong platoon or a small company, like depending.
Mm-hmm.
If it was further divided from there, I'd say it sounds like a company, but yeah.
Yeah.
Well, these were called a flight of missiles, but we only had 10 missiles.
Okay. At
Yeah,
the
but
time.
it wasn't a flight of airmen.
Okay. So you called okay. Just some of the language is a little different than between then and today for sure. But no, I think it's kind of, what was I going to say about Air Force OSI, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. That's who AFOSI is. And if you listen to anybody who has a story about UAPs and the Air Force, Air Force OSI comes up a lot as a sometimes sort of a bad guy. And I've heard people with stories and some of their encounters with OSI, and that OSI has run operations to sort of put disinformation out there and other sorts of things, essentially trying to discredit the stories and then discredit people. And I know too that that's kind of was the point of Project Blue Book, was to collect this information for the purposes of for the government's purposes, and then it also conducted smear campaigns on people, and it's where a lot of the language about people being crazy and UFOs sort of came from unofficially. This research into the UFO or UAP now problem, I guess, and it wasn't actually, it was just a data collection program and then a way to smear people or scare people who witnessed these things.
Yeah, I can't argue with what you've said there. Of course, Blue Book went through different phases.
Mm-hmm.
When it first started, I think it was 47, if I'm not mistaken. But we had the incident over Washington, D.C. in 1950, 51, 52. And at that time, Blue Book was known as Project Sign. Mm-hmm. And they actually produced a report to the head of the Air Force, which concluded that this was real. These were real objects of unknown origin. Mm-hmm. And I think it was trying to think. Vandenberg, General Vandenberg, mm-hmm. was the one that quashed that report and said, "No, you didn't give me enough evidence, and so I'm not buying that these were, extraterrestrial or anything like that." So there was a different code word used for that project, and it went to Project Grudge. Mm. Project Grudge was, as you say, an effort to discredit the sightings, mm-hmm. discredit people that reported them, etc. And then later on, after Grudge, it became Blue Book. Mm. And there was some good incidents collected in Blue Book. Some were classified. I don't know if they're still classified, some of the incidents. But that's when J. Allen Hynek got involved with Blue Book. Mm-hmm. And at first was playing along with the Air Force, discrediting the whole thing. But later on realized that there was something to it, and started speaking out in favor of this was a real phenomenon.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever have any interactions with Hynek?
No, I never met Mr. Hynek. I just met his son, but...
Under what context?
What's that?
You said you met his son. I was wondering under what context did you meet his son?
Oh, I was being videotaped for a documentary, and it was done at a location at home where mm-hmm. Paul Hynek, his son, was there. But no, I never met J. Allen Hynek.
The Air Force has a lot of people who have had interactions with UAP, and then even before the Air Force was a thing. I'm just curious if you'd ever had any contact with people like Jesse Marcel or his son. You have. Okay. What was it like?
Jesse Marcel Jr. Mm-hmm. Very credible guy. He was a helicopter pilot, I think, and also a medic. Mm-hmm. Fought in Iraq. But when I met him, it was during a conference, and I asked him to draw the symbols. He saw symbols on a piece of the Roswell crash, and he drew some symbols for him. So I've still got those somewhere.
Really?
Yeah.
Could you describe them?
Well, kind of hard to describe. One was a kind of a slash with a couple of dots above it. The others were, nondescript, really. Lines, something looked a little like a triangle. I'd have to locate those and show them to you sometime.
Right. That's pretty interesting. I'm trying to find a photo of if anybody's ever drawn any of the. I've heard them described as hieroglyphs before, and that they look very, very similar. Would you say that is sort of an accurate way of describing them?
Well, hieroglyphs can get pretty complex drawings. These were very simple lines, straight lines, dots. It didn't seem like much of anything, but he remembered very vividly what they looked like. I'm sure if you go on the internet, you should be able to find what.
That's what I'm looking at right now. Yeah.
Does this look?
What Marcel Jr. Has written.
Does that look similar?
This
famous I-beam.
It's kind of hard for me to see. They weren't as thick as that. When he drew them for me, they were just little lines.
Right. So you had the opportunity to talk to him, and obviously we're talking about the famous Roswell incident. Everybody knows, and it's come out a lot since then that essentially he was forced to cover up what had happened in that famous photo of him holding up like a mylar balloon or a weather balloon on the ground. He was just brought into a room and said, "Hey, you need to say that's what this is a downed weather balloon," even though the newspaper had already reported the Air Force's interaction with a UFO. But did he talk about what, like, maybe his dad said about that incident, and maybe anything that had happened regarding that?
Well, his dad was, I'm very embarrassed. We talked about it briefly with. I talked about it briefly with Paul and his dad. I'm sorry.
Jesse
I'm getting
Marcel.
mixed up now.
No problem.
No, I talked to him very briefly with Marcel Jr. and he said his dad was very embarrassed at having had to do that. But what do you do when a 2-star general tells you to do something?
Yeah, no doubt, especially while you're still serving, and not much you can do at that point, right?
Right.
Even if you did say something else, you're just going to wind up at Leavenworth, like you said before, and then the story is still going to be that it was a downed weather balloon, for sure.
Yeah, right.
Ever since between the time that you found that book and then what happened in 1967, did you ever have any other instances with UAP, or did anybody else from the Air Force or maybe AFOSI contact you about anything like that, as far as incidents or researching them or reporting?
No, not AFOSI. I did give my presentation to ARROW, All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office.
Yeah.
I did that in February of 2023.
Right.
And so it is now. They wrote me an email and said this is now official record or historical record under the ARROW investigation.
Right. It's been a lot the past couple of years, especially since 2017 when that article came out about the Tic Tac UFO that I believe the New York Times did. But have you had, what you experienced at Malmstrom, is that the only experience you've ever had with UAP, or have you had an ongoing, set of experiences?
Well, I did have an experience, and I've written about this in two of my books. Um, but it was a very, let's say, an abduction experience, and that happened in 1985. My wife and two small children were in the house, in this particular house that I recall, in Manhattan Beach, California. One evening, I woke up in the middle of the night and noticed there was bluish light coming from the living room. We didn't have any blue lights. I woke my wife up and asked her if she saw the blue light. She said, yeah. I said, I'm going to have to go get up and take a look because someone could be in the house. So
Right.
I started to get up, but I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. This was not sleep paralysis. I remember very vividly trying to recover my mobility, and I couldn't. I struggled and struggled, and I was completely paralyzed, just about. I at one point turned to my wife and asked for help, and she was now unconscious. The next thing I recall is seeing a hooded figure in our doorway of the bedroom, which was kind of frightening, but because I couldn't move.
Of course.
I didn't see, I don't recall the face. Everything I'm going to recount here is from hypnotic regression. I've had 4 sessions, and that's how I've recovered these memories. The next thing I recall is there being small beings in the room. They seemed like children to me. Again, I don't remember the faces or much of anything else except that they were small and seemed like small children. The next thing I know, they're raising me off the bed, floating off the bed, and floating towards the bedroom window, which had been latched that night. I even thought, these are children, they're not going to be able to unlatch the window. But believe it or not, and I know this sounds ridiculous, but they directed me right through the window. No shattered glass, just right through the window. And outside there was a bright light. The next thing, I presume I was on a craft, and I was being shown a needle, a long needle. It's about, I don't know, over a foot long. It was placed right in front of my eyes, held by very long, bony fingers. And I was told telepathically they were going to insert this needle in my groin area and it wouldn't hurt. Well, when they started to do this, it hurt like hell. Really some of the worst pain I've ever felt. And I recall that pain. But as soon as I told them it was very painful, the pain went away almost immediately. So after that, sat up on the side of the table, bed or table that they had me on, and escorted me to sit down in a molded seat inside the craft. And I had 2 escorts, the small grays, I guess, on either side. And then I was taken to another location, turned around, and this other being the spine of my back with 2 fingers, went all the way down my spine, and that was that. I was escorted out along a curved corridor, bright light, and I'm back in my bed. The next morning, neither my wife nor I remembered any of that. We had no recollection of that. We didn't talk about it. Fast forward another 27 years, I'm in Ireland at a UFO conference, and there's another abductee up there speaking about her experience, and she talks about a blue light filling up her bedroom. And I turned to my wife, who's sitting next to me, and because something clicked, I said, "Do you recall a blue light some time ago in our bedroom?" And she said yes. And so at that point, I realized that was there was something there that was real, and I started getting these regression sessions and recovered what I just told you.
That's incredible. This is so similar to a lot of what other people experience, and they describe experiencing the long needle being inserted into their body, same sorts of beings. Do you remember anything else that you can recall from what you saw inside the craft, what it looked like, any of the writing perhaps that Jesse Marcel Jr. showed you?
No, I don't recall any writing, just that it was very white in there, very light colored. There's no colors really. I remember the one being that had held the needle was very tall. In fact, I don't mean to get into another area here, but I don't know if you've heard of Nazca mummies.
I have.
Nazca, Peru. Yeah.
Yes.
And along with the mummies were found these detached hands. Have you seen those?
I have. Here, Chris, you want to pull up any photo you can find of that? I have seen that online, yes.
Yeah. Well, those hands are enormous. About twice as the size of our hands. And I decided actually to go, well, you don't see the hands there, but I decided to go down to Peru and take a look at these hands, especially, which are only 3 fingers, but the fingers themselves were very large and bony, very similar to the ones I recall holding that needle. Yeah.
I wonder if these are meant to be, because this article that he says that these were, or he found says that they were made from, it says earthly bones, but I almost wonder if these are meant to be replica dolls of things that they had contact with.
No, these are not dolls. These were actual I don't know how to put it, but they have done DNA analysis on the skin and bone, and they have been looked at very closely by medical people and scientists, and they've got a lot of imaging and X-ray and different forms of imaging, and they've been studied by not only a university in Peru, but American universities have also got involved in this now. And it's pretty well confirmed that these were, at one point, real biological entities. But they can't be explained through evolutionary process of any animals or beings that we know of. So it's still a big mystery.
Yeah. this has to have these. I mean, the experiences you had in Malmstrom, and then recovering these memories. It has to have, for you, a very personal sense of wanting to know more. Obviously, you traveled to Peru to take a look at this. I'm just kind of curious if you could expound on the natural, like the curiosity that developed in you and what you've learned, and sort of the path you've taken to learn more and understand.
Well, yeah, of course. My incident itself was enough to keep me interested uh, in working with other people to uncover other similar incidents at other nuclear bases.
Mm-hmm.
There was another incident in 1966 at Minot Air Force Base.
Mm.
Same kind of thing. All 10 missiles were shut down during UFO sighting above the missile sites.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so within the span of 6 months, including the ones that happened at Malmstrom,
Mm-hmm.
UFOs disabled 30 of our Minuteman I strategic missiles.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been other incidents where UFOs have been seen by many witnesses above missile sites, around missile sites, and around
Yeah.
storage facilities, and also around nuclear power plants.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I've documented a lot of that in my recent book, UAP and the Nuclear Puzzle is what it's called, available on Amazon. But
Mm-hmm.
I've documented about 13 such incidents.
Right. Um, do you think? I mean, I think that the prevailing theory is obviously that they're interested in the nuclear weapons that are there. That's sort of the mainstream theory. Do you have any other thoughts about why they were there, other than the nuclear weapons?
Uh, no, I think it was about the nuclear weapons, and
Mm-hmm.
I've been asked many times why I think it may have happened. Of course, I'm just speculating. I don't have any
Totally fine.
absolute knowledge, but
Yeah.
I think they were simply giving us a warning about having these weapons in the first place,
Mm-hmm.
and the danger to all life on the planet as we know it from possible nuclear war.
Right.
Uh, and I think that's why these have been recurring, and they've been recurring up until um, I heard rumors that there was another incident in Malmstrom in 2018. Um,
Yeah. I was going to sort of save it for the end, but I've had a couple, and these are shared experiences from my time at Malmstrom. And so I actually worked in the weapons storage area. I was, response force leader on up through eventually an area supervisor before I left in the weapons storage area. And uh, probably the biggest incident that I had experienced was with another. I was a tech sergeant at the time. Was with another tech sergeant, and I was actually training him to be an area supervisor. He had just gotten there from MacDill Air Force Base, and we were doing a movement at night. We had the MUNS guys out, and we were, moving back and forth. And we were set up at a TCP traffic control point, essentially just blocking off any traffic that could have come along the path for the movement. And then we both noticed that there was, very similar to what the guards that night with you saw, a bright orange light that essentially trailed the warhead and the response force vehicles that were traveling with the movement for about, I think that side of the fence is maybe 100 yards, the length that it had to travel, maybe 120 yards. And it stopped at the where it needed to be, and the MUNS guys did what they had to do to store it. And right about the time that they did that, it blinked out and then blinked up again, way up in the sky, way far away. And it happened. I mean, we both noticed it, and I don't know if you recall, or if the weapons storage area, what it may have looked like, if you had any experience at the WSA when you're at Malmstrom, but there's a big old watchtower in the middle of the WSA, and we affectionately called it Old Sally. But is a Vietnam era watchtower that we didn't use anymore, and it had all the old comms stuff up in there. But when it blinked out and faded up or went back up into the sky, it lit up the inside of the old watchtower, almost like somebody had flicked the light on and off really quickly. And I mean that was, we just had no idea what had happened, and we were like, well, that was really strange and really weird. And we remember we had a conversation about, well, maybe that was TRF, the Tactical Response Force guys from the the Hilo Squadron, and we were like, no, that couldn't have been, because we would have heard it, and it blinked out and was way up in the sky at a distance, kind of further away and at more of an angle offset to us. But another incident I had was when I had first got into Malmstrom, and I worked on midshift again in the weapons storage area, and we used to climb up on top of the conventional storage units there that had all kinds of stuff. They weren't nuclear storage, and we would go through the turret of the Humvee and get on top, and we'd kind of made it a kind of a, I guess, a flight tradition that we would sit up there, and with these, we had some chairs, like camping chairs, and we would watch the sun go down over the Little Belt Mountains, Lewis Clark Mountains, you know what I'm talking about there. And one night we watched another bright orange light just sort of form out off in the distance as the sun was going down, and it was so bright that you could see the side of the mountain, and that's a good distance away. And we were like, I wonder if they're doing a rescue thing out there, and we were like, well, there's no way, even if that was a spotlight, that it would be lighting up the mountain that bright, and you wouldn't be able to see it from this distance, because you could make out the whole face, you could make out the trees and everything, and then it went out and then appeared on the other side of the mountains again, and it seemed to be moving kind of back and forth again, just as bright. You could see the mountain range as if it was daylight, and then went out, and that whole thing lasted for maybe, I don't know, 2.5 minutes or so. But it's just, a lot of people, you spend time there, you're given these NVGs, right? And you're in airman night vision goggles, and what do? You look at the stars with them, and I think it would be easier to find somebody who hadn't had an experience almost everybody you could talk to would tell you there's some sort of weird thing they've seen in the sky. And I agree. I think it is totally because of the nuclear weapons that are there, and I don't know if it's some sort of keeping tabs on us or what, but it's still present there. And like I said at the beginning, even the minor league baseball team in Great Falls is called the Voyagers, and their mascot is an alien. So it's his name is Orbit. So it's almost, it's become sort of a theme there in Great Falls, and I don't think it'll ever go away. Even my friends at F.E. Warren and Minot have had the same experiences.
Yeah, right. No, I agree with you. Even during my time there were many reports by airmen in the field of these things, and I've heard from some of them. Did you write your incident up or not?
No, I never have. We didn't do anything with it. I told the Master Sergeant Flight Chief that I had, who didn't care. As long as the movement happened and everything was authenticated and shut down the way it was supposed to be, that was it. And kind of like what you said, the first time you talked on the phone to the guy topside, you told him, okay, well, let me know if anything weird happens. I mean, what am I going to do about a really bright orange light? I don't need to call a security incident. Nothing happened. What am I going to say? Bright orange light, security incident, And it's something him and I will randomly, if I talk about, hey, remember that happened? It's like, yeah, I remember that happened. And you've definitely seen things way up in the sky as well. They're moving around that aren't just a satellite, because they're not tracking the same line. Right. They're moving and chasing each other around out there. Yeah. I saw something similar to that when I was at a RAF Mildenhall. So I think they hang out at the military installations quite a bit.
Yeah, I want to also mention and emphasize that nothing serious happened to our missiles, any of the equipment during my incident. They simply um, sent signals to shut down a particular, not shut down, but intermittently shut down a piece of hardware that was essential to the navigation system called the logic coupler.
Mm.
And that's what shut the missiles down because the navigation system or the guidance system would not operate properly without this piece of hardware.
Right, which is important.
But there was nothing was fried. There was no damage
Right.
done to any of the equipment. Uh,
Yeah. No, I mean nothing that I obviously those experiences that I had, nothing happened, and no one I've ever met there mentioned anything happened as far as damage or anything like that goes. But
mhm.
um, security forces, Air Force pilots, Navy pilots, all these people. There's the very famous incident that happened as well in the UK, the Rendlesham Forest
Rendlesham,
incident.
sure.
Yeah. Have you had the opportunity to talk to any of those guys? That story
Oh
is
yeah,
pretty incredible as well.
oh yeah. I've spoken with Colonel Halt many times about it. Colonel Halt was the one that went out there to investigate and
Hmm.
had more sightings and recorded it.
You're right.
And I've spoken with some of the other principal witnesses.
Hmm. Yeah, I would like to talk to them one day. Um, I think it's pretty incredible to consider just all the people that have had these experiences, and um, they don't get talked about because I think it's sort of a commonplace thing in the military. You're going to see some weird stuff, and even reading the report that got posted by Michael Schellenberger online, the Immaculate Constellation report,
Yeah.
reading about the radar guys in the Navy and their experiences. It almost seemed like they just sort of expect these things to happen and carry on with their duty throughout the day or throughout the night, whatever it described them as some sort of ISR pattern out in the water, what the Navy guys were doing. But it does. I think that military members have, especially certain brand of military members have these experiences, and it's a lot more common than people realize.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
A lot more common, and I just hope that they make it clear to whistleblowers that whistleblowers won't be, retaliated against for coming forward with their stories.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I just spoke with one of the representatives that was actually, one of the representatives that was on the dais for the recent hearing that happened last week, and
Hmm.
um, well, I'm working with her. Hopefully, we'll get some people like myself and others who are witnesses at nuclear bases
Hmm.
uh, to testify in front of a public hearing.
I'm kind of curious how you got involved in the whole modern last 7 years of the disclosure that's been going on. Like, did somebody reach out to you, or is this something that you reached out to them and kind of got yourself involved?
Yeah, well, this is pretty much self-motivating.
Hmm.
I'm determined to get these stories out to the public, and I've written 3 books, and I got contacted early on by Robert Hastings, who
Hmm.
wrote a book called UFOs and Nukes,
Hmm.
and he has witnessed. He has interviewed many of the witnesses at various bases, various times, and so it was through him and also Stephen Bassett, who has invited me to Washington to his conferences, and then I produced a couple of my own conferences at the National Press Club.
Hmm.
Anybody that wants to see those can go to my YouTube page, Bob Salas, uh, or to my website, spiralgalaxy.org, and see the evidence that I've accumulated on my incident. So I've been at this for about 30 years now, just getting the word out.
Right.
I'm committed. I'm committed to disclosure, not only of my incidents, but everything else the government is hiding.
When you say everything else the government is hiding, do you just mean that in a general sense, or do you mean something else related to UAP, like maybe, you know, what they are specifically, or what?
Yeah, I'm convinced we have recovered craft. We have uh, back engineered some of that recovered craft, and maybe even developed and flown an actual model of these objects. And we have recovered biologics of non-humans that have been analyzed. So I think all that has happened, and the government is hiding it for their own reasons. We can only speculate why, but I think that's being done, and it's being done very efficiently and deliberately, and it's going to be difficult to get those people to come forward.
Right. Has anybody shared anything specific with you? I mean, obviously, if you can't go into anything like that, that's fine. But has anybody shared information with you throughout this process that confirmed this for you personally, or is this based on the testimony, like someone from like David Grush or, you know, any of the other like Commander Fravor,
Well,
Ryan Graves?
I'd rather not get into it, but yes,
Okay.
one of my classmates from the Air Force Academy, let's say, to my understanding, he confirmed that they have back engineered a craft and test them.
One of the other things with this is that like the Russians and Chinese have sort of had the same programs for a period of time, where they're obviously probably not as the Chinese probably not as long as us, but perhaps the Russians have. How much of this do you think that they have as well? Recovery programs or back engineered any of this stuff? And do you think that that is potentially why the U.S. has kept this so close under wraps, trying to prevent enemies from getting the same information and technology?
That's part of the reason, I think, for the secrecy, our secrecy, and theirs. But I think there are, let's say, there is information that has been shared between nations, between countries, because these craft have gone down in various countries. I don't know if you've heard of the Varginha crash in Brazil.
I have heard that. This is
There
one
was a
with
crash.
the actual. I'm sorry. Go. If you were going to explain it, go ahead. I was going to ask you.
Well, I'm not gonna. I don't know that much about it, except there was a craft that went down, and bodies were recovered,
Right.
and they were checked out pretty thoroughly. An autopsy was done on, I know, at least on one. There is a lot of evidence about that. The U.S. knew about it even before the crash. They knew the object was headed towards Brazil and informed the Brazilian government. I just spoke with Roberto Panotti, who wrote a book recently about the 1933 crash in Magenta, Italy. And that was recovered and stored and analyzed, looked at for a while. So,
Do you think any of this stuff that was recovered in 1933 or any of the other incidents and crash sites that had anything to do with the technology that the Germans were working on during World War II?
yes. In fact, Dr. Werner von Braun worked on the Apollo program. Actually confirmed that they had been working on back engineering UFO, and I can I'm just assuming that they had access to the since they were part of the Axis.
Right.
They had access to the crash from in Italy in 1933 and used that. But he confirmed it to one of our astronauts, at least one. I got his name now. Slipped my mind.
Okay.
But of course, he worked on the Apollo program with our astronauts, and it was one of them that testified or talked about it in his book. Yeah.
I would think that that sort of discovery and finding this technology back in 1933 or wherever it was, it made its way from Italy into Germany. You know, perhaps Mussolini handed this stuff over to Hitler or however that happened, but it had to be some pretty smart people to figure this stuff out and include it in a lot of the rocket technology that the Germans had, and the propulsion technology, I guess would be a better way to say it, because they were so far ahead in the United States for such a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you really learn about all the people that they brought over, and people like Werner von Braun, and the way that they discuss the cosmos, and then the way they get information. I'm just kind of curious, your thoughts on some of the people that followed Werner von Braun and the American space program, like Jack Parsons. You ever looked into any of the telepathy and ritual protocol that these guys ran down to learn any of this information? Do you think that, it's pretty common when your experience too, you were communicated to telepathically. How much do you think that is the same thing, this downloading of information, the telepathic transference of this information, like somebody like Jack Parsons talked about, and actual beings from wherever? Do you think that that's the same thing?
Well, I think people can learn telepathy or become better at it. You probably know about the studies out of the Stanford. Dr. Hal Puthoff was part of that, where they did studies of the type that we're talking about. And they made, I think that was sponsored by the CIA at one point, but they did have some success with that. Remote viewing. So yeah, you can't discount that. I know the Russians have had programs. I actually met some of the people that worked on those programs at a conference one time, but they were very much involved in this type of paranormal studies.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that information, I guess just to keep using the word download, do you think that actually is coming from the same beings that you had interactions with? Or do you think that it's something more spiritual?
Well, it's hard. I couldn't give you an answer to any of that. I do know that there is a spiritual component of the phenomenon. There's a good book called The Dual Soul Connection by Susie Hansen, Hansen. She's a long-time experiencer, but the beings that spoke with her talked about the soul, and they actually showed her the soul of her son that she would have in the future, and it was in the form of a blue orb, a small blue orb that she was able to hold and communicate with, I guess. Interesting. And yeah, And these beings, some of these beings are able to change form into spiritual form, I guess, or light beings. Um, so there's some kind of a strange spiritual part of this, and we don't know much about it at this point, but it's out there for us to learn.
Have you ever tried communicating to any of these things that you've had contact with?
Well, let's say I've had some communications in the form of visions, which I've tried to keep a journal of those experiences, but I have had from time to time different, let's say, communications. And my wife has had some communications also.
Are you willing to share any of those communications of the visions you or your
Well,
wife have had?
I'm sure my wife, I think she's doing something else right now, but she's had appearances of holographic figures. I've had holographic figures appear in front of me in the form of different scientific symbols.
Interesting.
She has also had a separate experience with a being that took her through the wall of our bedroom. Things like that. So strange, weird little things happen now and then.
Do you think your experiences at Malmstrom opened you up to this?
I have no idea if there's a connection, but I do know that after my Malmstrom experiences, I have had that other contact I mentioned, and other communications. Like I said, at some point, maybe I'll publish what I have in my little journal here.
I actually had a question for you about that, Brandon, just because this is much more your area of expertise. But isn't it typically that individuals that have experiences with UAP or UFO, they tend to cluster, and to where it's like if somebody has an experience, they're more prone to then have for it to be, or at least
Other
in their
experiences?
vicinity.
Sort of
Yeah, I
snowball?
think it's once you're contacted or have an experience that they whoever they are follow you or interact with you in some way afterwards. So yeah, that's fairly common.
It
Yeah.
almost reminds me of it would be like the same type of behavior that you would see with like a biologist that tags an animal and then comes back and checks in on it, because you were talking about how there was multiple occurrences at the same facilities where they were coming back around, like almost not necessarily rhythmically to where you could track it to the time, but they were definitely coming back. And then what you're describing, if somebody's contacted once and then there's multiple, if that indeed happens, it almost reminds me of that almost like clinical type of behavior where you're being checked in on almost, kind of thing. That's what it sounds like when you describe it that way. It was the first place my brain went, is all I'm saying.
It does sound
Yeah.
similar.
Oh, right. I think you're right, Chris.
Yeah.
Just one theory on it, though.
Well, I mean, as much as I've tried learning about these incidents and then reading some of the other works that people have published on them, it's made me kind of question some of the things that I've had happen to me before, and have thrown them in the hat of paranormal, like spiritual type experiences. And I'll give you an example. Like, it's just some of the things the sightings I've had or experiences I've had with like shadow beings. And I've read books that people have had experiences, and they are in the same category as UAP. And it makes me wonder. That's why I asked you if you thought like there was a spiritual connection, because these experiences that people have had and they write about them through the lens of UAP or these contact phenomena sound very similar to experiences that I've had or other people have had, and they lump it into like the ghost paranormal umbrella, and that it falls under that umbrella. But the experiences are very much the same or just, similar, and there's slight differences, And I've often wondered if that perhaps is what the right lens to look at it through. Right? Is this a contact with some sort of, ultra-terrestrial, extraterrestrial, interdimensional being, or is this something that's more spiritual and is of, another plane on a spiritual plane?
Yes, Brandon, it's very complex, this phenomenon, and like I said, things that people might consider ghosts or ghostly. Kind of fit into the same category as people who observe things. There's a lot of questions, and I don't have the answers. Sorry.
Kind of reminds me of a famous J.K. Rowling quote, right? Where Harry Potter looks at Dumbledore. Have you read the series?
I've seen all the movies.
Okay, there's in the very end, not to spoil it for anybody that's never read Harry Potter. I don't know how you haven't. Where have you been hiding under a rock? But there is a very existential quote in the end of the book where Harry has just technically died, right? And he goes to, he's speaking to Dumbledore, and he's like, "Oh, it looks like King's Cross Station, the train station." Dumbledore's like, "Oh, is that where we are?" And then he asks Dumbledore something very interesting. He goes, "Is this all real, or is this just in my head?" To which Dumbledore goes, "Well, of course it's in your head, but why should that make it any less real?" And so it's like I've always thought that was a very brilliant quote too, because there is a question to be asked about what is the fabric of reality. Well, it's the way that our senses allow us to experience what's happening in time and space. Not to get too weird, but
we're well past that line.
What is that? You know what I mean? And it's like, of course, it's all happening in your head, but it doesn't mean that it's any less real.
What?
Exactly. Good point, Chris.
No, I mean, there's a lot more people who are public about their research on these topics now than there were, I would say, even 20 years ago, at least. That mainstream, probably social media has a lot to do with it too, but that's sort of the conversation that centers around this now, is consciousness, time travel is another one, interdimensionality, all of these things. And I would ask you, Mr. Salas, what you thought it all was, but I don't think that there is an answer. I think that there's probably multiple things going on, and that who knows if even our perceptions are accurate, and if we even have the capability to perceive these things the way that maybe they should be perceived or would be perceived if we were on their level or whatever.
That's right, Brandon. I don't have too many answers, but we can learn from each other, our own experiences, and hopefully sometime in the future we'll have more hard answers. But right now it's a lot of mysteries involved in this.
Yeah. No, I look forward to seeing your involvement with the disclosure movement, and hopefully the next couple of years we'll get even more. I know that there was a lot of people that felt sort of let down by the recent congressional hearing on UAP, and that it wasn't, especially some disappointment with Lou Elizondo and some of the comments he's made about, saying that he can release some of that info behind closed doors or in a closed door session. And, the question is why? And, if you have any thoughts on that and why Lou does that. And obviously people have even said it casts doubt on his credibility. But I can't say that I was completely disappointed by them, but it definitely wasn't everything that it was sort of hyped up to be.
No, I agree completely. I'm not going to say too much about Lou because I've had a personal experience with him where he did disappoint me. Again, he gave me the same answers he's been given all this while, which is can't talk about that, or I'm not allowed to talk about that. Well, yeah, I was a little frustrated with the answers that we got from the other witnesses also, but on the other hand, it does take a certain amount of courage to come forward and at least talk about the subject, even if they can't be specific. We're getting the outlines of the truth, and I do know, as a result of the last two hearings, especially, there's a lot of frustration in Congress by those congressmen and women who are asking the questions, not only of these witnesses, but of different agencies that are supposed to be cooperating, but they're not. And there's a lot of frustration that's growing, and eventually it's going to come to a head, and we're going to start demanding more answers and bringing forth witnesses that have the, let's say, the facts, and can inform the public, because really that the public should be informed of everything the government knows, or most everything, so that we can go forward together with what I think is obviously a new era of contact. We're almost to the point where the government has admitted that these are not from Earth. The objects are not built on Earth, and their occupants are not from Earth. Okay, let's move
Technologies
forward.
of unknown origin, as the report says. Yeah,
Bob, you've seen the way they do, like launder political information into the public, right? It's the idea of like drip it out, drip it out, drip it out, and then by the time it becomes a foregone conclusion, then it's, well, of course that's always been true. Move on. That's yesterday's news. Like, do you think that maybe they're just doing a 6-decade version of that?
That's kind of one of my questions too. Was
and
then how many people do you think involved in disclosure are just controlled opposition?
Oh, you mean people that are disinforming, the disinformation campaign? Yeah. You've got to take that into account. Early on, I think my first book, I don't mean to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I pointed out that, well, because the MJ-12 documents, at least some of them, have been validated, there was, after Roswell, a group that was formed inside government, headed up by some very powerful people, that were handling the information derived from what they recovered at Roswell. And it makes sense that such a group would have continued on. And there's been plenty of evidence to show that those people in the know have been hiding it for some time, long time, and continue to do so. And they shouldn't be allowed to do that. The public has a right to know.
Would you say? I agree. The public does have the right to know, especially if it's some sort of, even if it's just an existential threat to the belief system that humans have. We deserve to know. But I've seen a lot recently, and this sort of, not to be a conspiracy theorist here, but the notion that perhaps one of the reasons why Kennedy was assassinated had to do with a few comments he made about releasing information from some of the incidents that had happened prior to him becoming president. Do you think there's any credibility to those claims?
I can't rule it out.
Yeah.
I don't. Of course, I don't know, but
For sure.
but I've heard those stories too.
Mm-hmm. Right. No, I mean, the biggest thing that concerns me is wondering who in this bunch of people who have connections to some of these programs like Arrow and ATIP, and if how much of them are actually being honest, how much of it is like we were talking about before is controlled opposition just to try and muddy the waters, because that's not just a tactic that's unique to this scenario. I mean, these are actual tactics that our clandestine services are trained to do, to create confusion and cause people to second guess information they're being fed. But I hope and pray that there some sort of truth comes out, and that it can be a sort of a unifying way, because there is a bipartisan effort, at least I see, from both sides, right, to get this information, which is encouraging.
There is, and like I said, the frustration is growing and growing, so I think that's going to come to a head fairly soon.
I agree.
So...
Okay.
Well, what was it? Joe Rogan was interviewing Donald Trump, right? And he brought up UFOs ever so briefly, because he brought up JFK. Donald Trump has promised to release the JFK documents.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I hope so.
That's what he had said, and now he's got RFK in the administration. So, but I thought it was very interesting, to your point, Brandon, when he brought up UFOs. I think the only thing that Donald Trump said was just like, "Oh well, there's a lot of interesting stuff there. You're all going to be very surprised." But he wouldn't talk about it. And then he just said, like, it was one of the only times that I've never seen him like bite and bunny trail. And he came off of that so quickly and was just like, no.
That says a lot in and of itself, right?
It really does. If you
quick shift off of topic.
His
personality, yeah. No, he's definitely got a very verbose personality, to say the least. Yeah. No.
Let's hope it happens.
Yeah.
I do.
Well, Mr. Salas, genuinely thank you for talking to us. I really just appreciate. This is has been a dream of mine to be able to have a conversation with you. I think it's pretty unique. The Air Force, I can't think of many other services other than maybe the Navy that have people who have had as many experiences. And I think it's just by virtue of our piece of the nuclear triad, and then obviously our aircraft and pilots, and some of the things we have the fortunate ability to guard and maintain, and I like hearing from people and documenting these experiences. And you're definitely, to me, a legend in this field. And we share the same common history of having been at Malmstrom Air Force Base. So thank you very much for your service to this country as well. And I enjoyed talking to you tonight, and I appreciate you carving out some time this evening for us.
Thank you, Brandon. I enjoyed it. And Chris, glad to help spread the word. So I'm going to be more active on these types of podcasts and presentations in the future.
Well, if you ever find out any huge breaking news in the disclosure front, you let me know, and we'll put it out there.
Okay.
All right, sir.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.